Hello and welcome to Waterford Property Watch. Today I'm joined by Maria Clifford, who has over 21 years experience in property management, and we're going to discuss what landlords need to know in 2025. Hi Maria.
Hi Leanne.
And the first question is, what do you need to be registered as a landlord?
So to register for a landlord, first of all, when you find a tenant, you have to register yourself as a landlord and the tenant with the RTB. So you're registering the actual tenancy. But to do that, obviously your own details, your PPS details of your tenants, then you need to pay the registration fee. But the important thing to remember is that the regulations changed in recent years, and now you have to re-register a tenancy every single year, and it's €40. Now, failure to do that, if you forget, you can go and kind of register it like retrospectively. You end up paying fines and there's extra charges. If, the RTB does have the powers to actually fine people up to €4,000 as well if they fail to register their tenancies.
Okay. And what rent can you charge on a property?
That is completely dependent on the property, what part of the country you're in, and if the property is in an RPZ. If it's in an RPZ, which is a rent pressure zone, it means that you can look at doing an annual rent review. And depending on market conditions, the maximum you can increase the rent in those areas is 2% a year. Now, the important thing to remember is that some people think, well, I just bought a new property. The tenant in it moved out before I closed the sale. So I'm a brand new landlord. I'm getting a brand new tenant. I'm putting in a new kitchen and painting it and spending a few thousand. Can I not charge market value rent? No, you can't. You have, if the property is rented anytime in the previous 24 months, doesn't matter if you were the landlord, someone else was the landlord, new tenant, those rules still apply. Okay. Outside of an RPZ, if you have a property that's located outside a rent pressure zone, you can do a rent review every 2 years, but you need to get market evidence within 30 days of other properties, similar style and so on, that were rented to set your rents and provide that evidence to the tenant. And you have to do a submission then to the RTB as well in both cases.
And if you're going to rent your property, does it require having a BER cert?
Yes, it does. If you're going to advertise a property for rent and indeed for sale, and you're going to have a tenant moving into the property, it requires a BER cert.
What's expected in your property if you're going to rent it out?
So your property has to meet the minimum standards of rented accommodation. And those standards can be different from the way maybe you would choose to live in your own home as a homeowner. With renting a property, there's certain obligations you have to meet. There has to be adequate ventilation in each room. And normally that's either perma vents on the windows, if the windows that were fitted came with perma vents. Otherwise, you're actually burrowing a hole through the wall, putting in ventilation. Window restrictors, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, fire blanket or an extinguisher, proper sanitary ware, cooking facilities, and so on. There's more information actually on the RTB website about the minimum standards. One thing to remember is I often come across landlords and they, after kicking out their house and they have smoke alarms in, and the older smoke alarms with the battery and the red button, they're illegal in rented accommodation. A lot of landlords don't realise that. The type of smoke alarms you need are ones with they're concealed units with a 10-year battery life. So it doesn't rely on a tenant, remembering to change a battery. Or they're alarms that are linked up to the mains as well. There's a battery pack in them, but they're also powered by electricity. Now, an electrician can easily put them in, and they're quite cost effective. But I suppose it removes the issue, because the temptation there is when a battery's dying, people jump up on a stool, they take the battery out and they just forget about it. But that's no good. If you have a fire, you're putting safety at risk.
Exactly, yeah. And if you're doing a lease agreement, does it have to be in writing with your tenants?
So look, to protect both sides and to really lay out all the terms and conditions on both sides, there's nothing like a written lease agreement, because you can introduce special conditions such as maybe no pets in the property, that, the grass has to be cut, any kind of nuances around the property, the bins can't be kept at the front of the house, you have to put them in the back. It really irons out all those details. Yeah. But nevertheless, some landlords may have rented to somebody and they have a verbal arrangement. That is still a lease. There's still a contract there because somebody has moved into the property, so they become a tenant when they moved in, and money has exchanged as well. Okay. So both parties are still protected by the regulations. Perfect. But nothing like a written lease agreement for clarity.
Yeah, just to keep it clear.
Yeah.
And if I was looking to maybe take back my property in time, is there much notice period required to give tenants?
So it depends on the length of time the tenants have been in the property. So it can go anything from 90 days right up to nearly a year or more. But what you have to do is look at when your tenant moved in. And if you, again, on the RTB website or citizens information, it gives the whole table of all the years when the tenants lived and the required notice. So it's important to be, and especially I suppose landlords maybe with verbal arrangements, you need to be very certain when your tenant moved in to ensure you give them adequate notice, because they are entitled to adequate notice, or else it's null and void if you make a mistake.
Perfect. And is there a specific form that needs to be filled out for that? Or?
Yeah, so when you issue notice, at the moment, if a tenant is in a property for more than 6 months, whether you've written leases, verbal leases, doesn't matter. That tenant has security of tenure for life. So it means they have a right to remain in the property for their lifetime.
Okay.
Unless, obviously, they break terms in the lease, don't pay the rent and so on. Or if the landlord, there's 3 grounds where the landlord can end the tenancy, and that is substantial renovation works. Now, that's not painting and putting in carpet or even a kitchen. That is really like gutting the house, a really, really big job. The owner is going to sell the property. Or else they're going to move into either them or direct family members, such as like a son, a daughter, a parent is going to move into this property. In those cases, you still have to go to a solicitor and get a statutory declaration completed and provide that with a notice form, and do a return to the RTB then on the same day. So it's very important all those steps are followed, or else the notice is completely null and void.
Perfect. And is there any tax clearance regulations for landlords?
So rent is an income, so we always advise our landlords to seek tax advice at the outset or speak to their accountant. The revenue are quite helpful as well if somebody wants to contact them. But they're like, rent is an income, so it may be subject to some form of income tax. There are things that are deductible from that, such as management fees if you're paying an estate agent to manage your property, certain work that you carry out to the property, other charges such as maintenance charges and so on. Yeah.
Perfect. And then just the last question is, what are the biggest pitfalls that landlords have to face currently?
So the pitfalls that landlords face currently, and probably always, are poor record keeping.
Yeah.
You need to record your property when you do inspections, take photos, make notes before people move in, move out during the tenancy. That's really important. If there's an issue with the property, there's damage done, and you need to take case to the RTB because the tenant won't stand over that damage. I'm talking about like holes in walls, furniture missing, things badly damaged, not wear and tear. You don't have a foot to stand on unless you've got photographic evidence. That's clear, that you won't, it's he said, she said, you have to be able to prove your case. The other thing is not setting the rent correctly. It could be setting it too high, it could even be setting it too low in some cases, but sometimes landlords could set it too high, not factoring in the previous tenancy and the RPZ rules. And that just could be down to a lack of education and not knowing, but that is something that will catch up with you in the future and you'll have to repay all that money back. And the RTB do have powers to issue fines. The other thing is not taking proper advice from the start, tax advice. That's crucial. Not maintaining your property in between tenancies even. All of a sudden, if you don't do it and you, quite frankly, neglect the property, within 15, 20 years, it becomes a massive project and an expensive one. So dealing with things as they come up and keeping ahead is really important. And then other pitfalls would be, I suppose maybe it comes down to experience, not maybe having the experience or the skill to know how to vet tenants properly, asking the right questions, what to look out for, understanding maybe the ability to pay the rent, the track record that you will need, like references and so on, how to interpretate those references. That's another one. And then I think poor communication as well. I spoke to a landlord last week. He's a tenant down in the Limerick-Clare region, and there's a dispute going on between them, and it's resorted to just sending emails. And I think once it goes to that dispute, it's just going to grow. It's going to get worse. There's nothing like calling to the property, picking up the phone, and trying to fuse situations, because you have to manage. It's an ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
There's limited grounds, for the tenant to leave the property unless they choose to themselves. See, it's really important to try and keep the relationship on a good note.
Yeah, good two-way communication.
Yeah, it's vital. Yeah.
So Maria, thanks for your time today.
You're welcome, Leanne.
That's been Waterford Property Watch, and don't forget to follow us for more useful information.